Okay, so I'll give you all some context for this in a minute and explain how it links up with Thomas Hobbes. But for now, I'm just going to tell you that it's a brief excerpt from a novel by Terry Pratchett called Hobbes. So, what did y'all make of this? What did you get out of this? Yeah, Brandon.
I took it as, I think that both the people in the argument believe that the world is very unjust, that one chooses to lie about certain things and kind of spread that to younger generations early, so they're not really disappointed when they have to do bigger injustices later on.
Okay. What about the rest of y'all? Let's just get first impressions here, and then we'll try to build on this.
Things like justice, mercy, and duty are constructs.
Yeah. And that kind of connects to what Brandon was saying, right? The idea being that, like, are justice and mercy and duty things that actually exist in nature, right? And what is the argument here seem to be about these things? Do they exist in nature? No, they are essentially lies, right? But when we use the word lie, right, what do we usually mean by it? What does a word like lie imply?
Deviation from the truth.
Okay, yeah, a deviation from the truth, right? A deliberate deviation from the truth, right? Right. You can't really lie by accident, right? If you're lying by accident, then you're simply mistaken, right? So yeah, a lie is a deliberate deviation from the truth. So you have to know you're lying in order to lie. And do we usually, like, how do we usually think about the morality of lying? Yeah, that lying is wrong, right? That it's best to be honest, it's best to tell the truth. So how is Pratchett playing here with the morality of lying as a practice? Yeah, like, not only is it okay, in some circumstances it's necessary, right? Because what do you not have if you don't tell yourself some of these lies? What's that?
Humanity.
Yeah, humanity. You basically don't have morality, right? Without lying to some extent. Without pretending that things like justice and mercy are somehow natural, right? So, Pratchett is a fantasy novelist, right? In particular, he writes like satirical fantasy. But satirical fantasy that usually deals with social and philosophical issues, right? So in this book, for example, the Hogfather is a figure kind of like Santa Claus. And the novel itself deals with the relationship between reality and belief, right? And Hobbes' social contract theory is in a lot of ways based on this same kind of relationship, right? Between what's real and what's natural, right? And the kinds of artificial constructs that we are able to create to rein in human nature. So, what were you guys able to get out of the excerpt from Leviathan I had y'all read? What does Hobbes' view of human nature seem to be? Were you able to figure that out? Yeah, James. Oh, there was not a hand up here scratching your head? So I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
You say it again.
What does Hobbes' basic view of human nature seem to be? What does he think humans are like naturally? Okay. Bad. Bad in what ways? What's bad about us?
Greedy.
Okay, we're greedy. What else?
Disorganized, because it says act as if there's some ideal order, like there's no, or not really disorganized, but like all type of order, but like there's no order in the world.
Okay, we're moving on from the Terry Pratchett here. We're going into the Thomas Hobbes that y'all read for today. Yeah, Brandon.
Our interests oppose one another.
Yeah. We're greedy, and essentially what that means is that we're selfish, right? We're always looking out for ourselves. We want more for ourselves. And so the basic human motivator, right? One of the two basic human motivators that Hobbes detects, right, is desire. Right? We want stuff. And we will by and large do what it takes to get it, right? So let's look at how he believes human beings are in what he calls the state of nature, right? So can I get somebody to read the first paragraph for us that says, "Nature hath made men so equal"? Page 82.
Nature hath made man so equal in the facilities of body and mind as though there be thou one man sometimes manifestly stronger in body or a quicker mind than other yet. When all is reckoned together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable as that one man can thereupon claim to himself any benefit, to which another may pretend as well as he. For as the strength of body, the weakest for strength, enough to kill the strongest, either by secret
Machination.
or by confederacy with others that are in the same way.
Okay, so thanks. So let's pause there, right? So what are people like relative to one another? What's our strength relative to one another in the state of nature? Yeah, that human beings in the state of nature are equal to one another, right? Some of us may be faster, some of us may be stronger,
And then
some of us may be, pardon?
Over mind, it says
Yeah.
over mind than others.
Yeah, some of us might be more clever, right? But he's arguing that basically all evens out, right? Because the strong can still be killed by a trick, right? Or by other people banding together against them. So, to give you an example here, right? So let's say that James has a parcel of land that the rest of us all want, right? He's also bigger and stronger than each of us individually. And he carries a great big hitting stick. So, none of us individually could beat him in a fight to take it, maybe, right? But, yeah, one of us might, like, if, say Brandon is smarter than James, right? You might be able to trick him into giving it to you. Or the four of us together might be able to band together and take it from him, right? Because he can only hit one of us with that stick at a time. So the basic idea here being that, yeah, in the state of nature, everyone has more or less equal capacities, right? All right, good. So let's proceed here. Can I get somebody to continue with, and as to the faculties of the mind?
And as to the faculties of the mind, set aside the arts grounded upon words, and especially the skill of proceeding upon general and infallible rules called science, which very few have, and but in few things, as being not a native faculty born with us, nor attained as prudence. While we look after someone else, I find yet a greater equality amongst men than that of strength. For prudence is but experience, which equal time equally bestows on all men in those things that equally apply themselves unto. That which may perhaps make such quality incredible is but a pain and seeing one's own wisdom, which almost all men think they have a greater degree in the vulgar, that is, that all men but themselves and a few others who, by faith or for comparing with themselves, that for such is the nature of men, that howsoever they may acknowledge many others to be more witty, or more eloquent, or more learned, yet they will hardly believe there be many so wise as themselves, for they see their own wit at hand, and other men's at distance. But this proveth rather that men are on the point of equal than unequal. For there is not ordinarily a greater sign of the equal distribution of anything than that every man is contented with his share.
Okay, so he's moving on from talking about strength now here to talking about what? So he's talking about everybody being of more or less equal strength before, right?
Yeah, and it says, I find yet a greater equality amongst men than that of strength.
That in terms of mind, right? Everybody is, at least in the state of nature, more or less equal as well, right? So in terms of both our strength and our intelligence, right? And does everybody understand what he means by something being like a native faculty? If something is native to us, what does that mean?
Like natural.
Yeah, natural, something we're born with, right? So, what increases our intelligence that we're not born with? Education, right? Okay, so that is an unnatural enhancement of intelligence, right? And experience, right? What he calls here prudence, right? We learn to be wise. We learn to be prudent through experience, right? And we learn to be clever through education.
Yeah, and then it says, a man proves that they're not born, that they're equal and unequal with the
Yeah, basically, you take these two things away, right?
yeah. He says again that evens out, that it still makes them equal.
Yeah. And we are all, once again, equal, right? And then what's the problem with everybody being equal? Can I get somebody to start reading the next paragraph from this equality of ability?
From this equality of ability ariseth equality of hope in the attaining of our ends. And therefore, if any two men desire the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they become enemies. And in the way to their end, which is principally their own conservation, and sometimes their own delectation, sometimes their delectation only, endeavor to destroy or subdue one another. And from hence it comes to pass that where an invader hath no more to fear than another man's single power, if one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seat, others may probably be expected to become prepared with forces united to dispossess and deprive him, not only of the fruit of his labor, but also of his life and liberty. And the invader again is in the like danger of another.
Okay, thank you. So, what does all of this equality of ability for Hobbes add up to? What does this mean when we apply human desires to it? Yeah. Because if you and I want the same thing, right? Odds are we can't both have it. And so, if there is nothing to restrain us, right? If there's nothing to hold us back from fighting over it, we're gonna fight. So, the example he gives at the end of the paragraph here, you take a guy who was, built himself, a nice little estate, right? He's tilled the soil, he's planted, he's got it all very nicely organized and nicely set up. There's nothing to stop someone else who happens to be momentarily stronger than he is from coming and taking it, right? And then, once that person has taken it, is there anything to stop someone else from coming and taking it from him? So in a state of more or less total human equality, right, according to Hobbes, no one's property is ever secure. It's always every person against their neighbor. So we can probably relate this actually to what Tawfiq al-Hakim was writing about in The Sultan's Dilemma, right? This idea of the way of the sword, right? This is kind of what that looks like in practice, right? If you live by the strength of your arm alone, right? If that is your sole source of authority, then you are always in danger of someone else coming and taking what you have because they happen to be stronger than you, right? All right, so can I get somebody to continue from the diffidence of one another? Diffidence, by the way, just to define this quickly for y'all, diffidence, in the sense Hobbes is using it, means distrust and a kind of reluctance to form relationships. Right, so a kind of natural suspicion that exists between people, right? All right, so can somebody start from the diffidence of this diffidence of one another? Anybody? Go for it.
From this difference of one another, there is no way for any man to secure himself so reasonable as anticipation, that is, by force or wiles to master the persons of all men he can, so long till he see no other power great enough to endanger him. And this is no more than his own conservation requireth, and is generally allowed, also because there be some that, taking pleasure in contemplating their own power in the act of conquest, which they pursue farther than their security requires, if Others that otherwise would be glad to be at ease within modest bounds should not by invasion increase their power. They would not be able a long time by standing only on their defense to subsist. And by consequence, such augmentation and dominion over men being necessary to a man's conservation, it ought to be allowed to go now.
Okay, so thank you. What's the only way then, in this state of nature, according to Hobbes, that we can be secure? What's the only way you can make yourself secure? How can you make sure you're safe from your neighbors?
To see no other power great enough to endanger you.
Yeah. So let's try to unpack that and think about what that means, right? If there's no power great enough to endanger you, what does that mean about you relative to your
You're
neighbors?
strong enough so that nothing.
Yeah. That you're strong enough to dominate them, right? So the only way you can be safe in the state of nature is if you're strong enough to make everybody else afraid of you, right? Until somebody else comes along who's able to make you afraid of them. Okay, so I think I want to kind of jump here to what's probably the best known paragraph in the piece, because it kind of sums up Hobbes' argument about human life in the state of nature, right? That is, in its absolute natural state with no government, right? Whatsoever, therefore, is consequent to a time of war, where every man is enemy to every man, the same is consequent to the time wherein men live without other security than their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them withal. In such condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So, if we look at these last couple of words here, right? Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This essentially sums up Hobbes' notion of what life is like in a world without government, right? Everybody's on their own. Everybody's poor. Everybody's constantly afraid of death. And we can't rise above the level of beasts, right? If we look at the rest of this paragraph, right, without security, without providing for security, what else can we not have? What's missing, according to Hobbes, if you don't have security? What's that?
Almost everything.
Pretty much everything we would call civilization, right? So, most, anthropologists would call agriculture the basis of civilization, right? That Civilization starts with farming, because then people can start settling down in one place and building cities, right? Hobbes would argue that civilization actually starts with security, that you can't have anything that makes life worth living if you don't first secure the people and their property, right? So let me give you a little bit of background to help you understand where this is coming from. And then we'll kind of continue on with the rest of this. So Hobbes is writing in the mid-17th century. In particular, during a period of civil war in his native England. And God, would you please just stay still? No, you won't. Okay. So the English Civil War begins in 1642 and kind of runs intermittently until 1651 in 3 different phases. Do any of you know anything about the English Civil War or what caused it or how it ended? Okay, James, what do you know about it?
It was between Charles the First.
Yes.
Parliament.
Okay, yeah. The basic point at issue here, is whether or not the king had the right to govern without the consent of the parliament, right? Without the consent of the body representing the people. So Charles I was a believer in the divine right of kings. Is this a familiar concept to anybody, or can anybody at least kind of reason out what this means? What's divine right when we're talking about kingship or monarchy? If you claim divine right, what are you claiming?
You're God's representative on earth.
Yeah, that God has ordained you specifically to be king, right? And as such, you are to be obeyed. So, Charles is claiming that his kingship and thus his actions are ordained by God. Parliament is saying, yeah, but we've also got this document called the Magna Carta that says that we get some role in these decisions, right? And Charles makes a number of unpopular decisions, right? He starts a couple of unsuccessful wars. He runs through the royal treasury and starts raising taxes on everybody without the consent of Parliament. And basically, he just ignores Parliament when making his decisions, right? So in 1642, these come to a head, and Parliament tries to take him prisoner. And so two forces gather here, right? There are the royalists, also sometimes known as cavaliers, fighting on Charles's side. And by and large, they consist of the traditional landowning nobility, right? Parliament is led by a previously obscure guy by the name of Oliver Cromwell. And because many of the parliamentarians don't come from the old landed classes, right? They're more kind of middle class group. They don't follow the same kinds of fashion that the Royalists and the Cavaliers do. So they come to be called Roundheads because of their kind of bowl-shaped haircuts. Whereas the leading Cavaliers all kind of like, if you look at like portraits of early 17th century noblemen, right? They all have long, flowing, teased out hair, right? Yeah, the Roundheads are so called because they reject that kind of look. So, in 1649, Charles is captured and executed. One clean sweep of the headsman's axe. And by 1651, the parliamentarians win, and for a little over a decade, England is without a king and is ruled primarily by Cromwell as Lord Protector. So Hobbes witnesses a decade of chaos and violence and general brutishness fought over the prerogatives of a king, right? So this is the basis of the earliest form of social contract theory, which I think we talked a little bit about last time, but it might be a good idea to revisit exactly what this means. So remind me, somebody, I know at least one of you knew this term before. What is social contract theory?
An agreement between people and the government.
Yeah, that the basis for government, right, the only legitimate basis for government is an agreement between the people and the sovereign, right? Whoever or whatever that might be. And if either side fails to live up to their side of the bargain, right? So if the people fail to live up to their side of the bargain, then the sovereign has the right to punish them. And if the sovereign fails to live up to their side of the bargain, then the people have the right to revolt and replace them. Right? Now, where Hobbes and other social contract theorists differ is what they think the legitimate purpose of government is, right? So, John Locke, who comes along a little later and is shaped by similar sets of circumstances, argues that the legitimate purpose of government is to protect the rights and liberties of the people. Does Hobbes seem to be very much concerned to you with the rights and liberties of the people? What happens to people if you give them too much liberty, according to Hobbes? Think back to what his state of nature with no government is like, right?
I guess they have full liberty then.
What's that?
They have full liberty then.
Yeah, the state of nature for Hobbes is full and absolute liberty, right? And if you give people total liberty, according to Hobbes, then what you end up with is basically anarchy, right? Where the strong take what they want, and everybody is constantly in fear for his or her life or property. So for Hobbes, the legitimate purpose of government is to hold a monopoly on legitimate violence. Right. Basically, what Hobbes argues is that the purpose of government is to defend your stuff for you, right? So that you don't have to, so that you can focus on other things, so that you can focus on industry and navigation and arts and letters and other things of that, like the things that basically Hobbes argues make up civilization, right? So security makes civilization possible, and in order to make civilization possible, Hobbes argues the people have to give up their right to use violence to the government, right? So that they can be assured that their persons and property are secure. And if the government fails to provide that security, that would be, for Hobbes, a breach of contract, right? Where the people would then have the right to revolt. And again, like, I am not presenting this as my theory of life in the world of government, right? I am trying to present Hobbes' theory to you sympathetically. So does anybody have any questions about this so far? Everybody with me? Everybody get it? Okay. So let's look at how he proves his point and then how he tries to apply this, right? On page 84, just follow along with me here. It may seem strange to some man that has not well weighed these things, that nature should thus dissociate and render men apt to invade and destroy one another. And he may therefore, not trusting to this inference made from the passions, desire perhaps to have the same confirmed by experience. Right? He's like, okay, you want proof? I'll give you proof. Let him therefore consider with himself. When taking a journey, he arms himself and seeks to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. When even in his house, he locks his chests. And this when he knows there be laws and public officers armed to revenge all injuries shall be done him. What opinion he has of his fellow subjects when he rides armed, of his fellow citizens when he locks his doors, and of his children and servants when he locks his chests. Does he not there as much accuse mankind by his actions as I do by my words? But neither of us accuse man's nature in it. The desires and other passions of man are in themselves no sin. No more are the actions that proceed from those passions, till they know a law that forbids them, which till laws be made they cannot know. Nor can any law be made till they have agreed upon the person that shall make it. Okay, so let's start with the first half of the paragraph, right? Why, according to Hobbes, do people taking a journey ride armed? Why do people lock their doors at night? Why do people lock up their chests of valuables even in their own homes? What does this show about the way we regard our fellow humans or our fellow citizens?
We don't trust them.
Yeah, that we don't trust anybody, right? If we're locking up our chests of valuables in our own homes, right, it means we don't trust our own families. And he's saying, like, this is the way we behave when we have laws and government to protect us, right? So, if we are this distrustful when we have some guarantee of security and people who will take care of it if someone attempts to harm us or steal from us, right? Then imagine how much worse it would be if we didn't have that. But neither of us accuse man's nature in it. The desires and other passions of man are in themselves no sin. No more are the actions that proceed from those passions till they know a law that forbids them, which till laws be made they cannot know, right? So you can't blame people, he's saying, for acting in defiance of laws that don't exist, right? If there is no law, then there's nothing to constrain human behavior. Nor can any law be made till they have agreed upon the person that shall make it, right? So, at least to some extent, the ruler must be chosen, right? Not by the will of God, as it were, right? But by some form of popular consensus, right? Everybody has to be able to agree on who's going to make the laws. So there needs to be some form of popular consensus here. And that's where the social contract idea comes in. Right? Everybody has to agree at least who's going to be empowered to make these laws for us, right? It may peradventure be thought, there was never such a time nor condition of war as this. And I believe it was never generally so over all the world. But there are many places where they live so now. For the savage people in many places of America, except the government of small families, the concord whereof dependeth on natural lust, have no government at all, and live at this day in the brutish manner, as I said before. However, it may be perceived what manner of life there would be where there were no common power to fear, by the manner of life which men that have formerly lived under a peaceful government used to degenerate into a civil war. So, Hobbes is actually giving us a fairly inaccurate picture here of indigenous life in the Americas, in part by calling people savage. And also by believing that, like arguing that they have no system of government other than kinship ties, right? So what he's trying to do here is diffuse a counterexample that people might use against him, right? So there's a popular idea from the 16th through the 19th centuries. It's an idea that actually kind of still has some hold in the popular imagination, though we wouldn't use this terminology anymore. Have anyone ever heard the term noble savage before? Does anybody know what this means?
It's kind of like somebody that is like a savage, basically, but they do it for like a noble cause, basically, like more than themselves. But it's still in ways savage, but it's for more than them. Like it's greater than just them.
Okay, let's think about the word savage. Like what do we usually use the word savage to mean?
Barbaric or violent.
Barbaric or violent, yeah. We tend to associate the word in particular with violence, right? And at least part of that would have been a current usage of the term in Hobbes' day as well, right? We tend to associate the term savage with barbarism and with a lack of civilization, right? So what a number of thinkers and philosophers argued, and this was particularly around the time of the beginnings of European colonization in the New World, was that these indigenous tribes that, as far as they could tell, had no formal governments, still lived by these particular codes of honor, and behaved to each other in more natural and admirable ways than people in civilized societies in Europe, right? Now, this was also based on a fundamental misunderstanding, right? The fact that the colonists did not recognize the form of government that these indigenous peoples practiced, right, does not mean that they had no formal government structures of their own, right? So the whole idea is based on a misconception that no, actually, these nations did have laws and government and formal legal processes and things like that. They were different from what Europeans practiced, and often derived from different philosophical bases, right? But they did exist. But what Hobbes is trying to show, right, is that life without government is always vicious and nasty and brutal, right? And so what he's trying to do is diffuse the possible counterexample that someone might use against him. So, well, what about, these people who live peacefully together in blissful anarchy in the Americas, right? What he's trying to say is that, well, no, that anarchy isn't actually blissful. Whereas we also know now today that it wasn't actually anarchy either. All right. Can I get somebody to continue here for us with the paragraph that says, but though there had never been any time or in particular men. Bottom of page 84.
But though there had never been any time wherein particular men were in a condition of war, one against another, yet in all times kings and persons of sovereign authority, because of their independency, are in continual jealousies and in the state and posture of gladiators, having their weapons pointing and their eyes fixed on one another, that is, their forts, garrisons, and guns upon the frontiers of their kingdoms, and continual spies upon their neighbors, which is a posture of war. But because they uphold thereby the industries of their subjects, there does not follow from it that misery which accompanies the liberty of particular men.
Okay, thank you. So what is Hobbes describing here? What's going on here in this paragraph?
Posture.
Yeah, a constant war, like a constant kind of wartime posturing, right? And who does it? Who does this posturing? Who's responsible for this bellicose behavior? Go ahead, sorry?
The government.
Yeah. Kings and persons of sovereign authority are in the posture of gladiators, right? Constantly aiming their weapons at the border, right? Should anybody try to cross it. But then what does that allow? If the government is always prepped and ready for war here, right? What does that mean for everybody else?
It doesn't. The misery which accompanies the liberty of particular men doesn't have.
Yeah, people can pay attention to doing things like building civilization, right? Because they don't have to worry about defending themselves. And this really is the heart of Hobbes' argument, right? That if you give up responsibility for security to a sector of society that is specialized in that, rather than taking it upon yourself, then you have more time for things that actually make life better and more meaningful, right? Because you don't have to constantly worry about your neighbor, like not just like letting his dog piss on your flowers, right? But actually coming and trying to take your stuff. Now, one last thing I want to do today, and then we'll let you go. I want to look on page 333 or 332, and what we have here is the title page of the original publication of Leviathan. And I want you to just to look at the image at the top, right? At the top half of the picture. What do you see there? What do you notice? And and if you could just look on with somebody else. It's it's not in the that way. It's just on page 332. There we go. All right, so look at the image. What do you see? What do you notice?
He's bigger. He's like overseeing everything.
Yeah, you got this big guy with a crown looking over everything. He's looking over the hills and plains, looking over the city, right? And what's he holding?
Swords.
Yeah, he's holding a sword. And can you see what his body is made up of? Well, it's not, you're thinking along the right lines, but they're not soldiers, right? They're just people. Right, so the idea here being that the king, who is ultimately responsible for warfare and for security, right, still derives his authority from the people, right? His body is made up of the nation. All right, so we're going to stop with that. Does anybody have any questions about any of this? Okay, so for your next reflection papers, right, you can use this or the Sultan's Dilemma. Remember, you're reading Thomas Malthus for next time, right? And I did also want to say, like, by and large, your first set of reflection papers was really pretty good. I was actually pretty impressed with the work you all turned in. So, yeah, I'll let you go. We'll see you on Thursday. We'll be out here unless I tell you otherwise.